Peter, Sam and the Refreshment Lady is the 7th episode of the 4th series based on the story of the same name from the Railway series book 4 Little Engines. This was the only episode for the TV series that I never actually got to see when I was a child. I didn't actually get to see this one until years later when I was introduced to YouTube. This is the only episode where I never got to see it as a child, but ended up seeing it in my teen years. So how does it hold up to this day? Sir Handel has been naughty, so the Fat Controller has shut him up in the shed for a while. Peter Sam is now single-handedly running the Skarloey Railway and extremely excited about his new position, despite Skarloey warning him to keep calm. One day, Peter Sam picks up some coaches and heads to Crovinsgate, but despite his best efforts, he arrives late. Henry is unimpressed and threatens to leave without his passengers if Peter Sam is late again. Peter Sam is secretly worried, but quickly gets back to work, happy to be running the Skarloey Railway. He begins singing to himself and the coaches happily follow along. Later that afternoon, Peter Sam makes his scheduled hour-long stop at the lakeside station. Whilst there, his crew and the guard buy tea and cakes from the refreshment shop at the station. The woman who runs the shop always catches this train home. As the crew and passengers prepare for their journey, Peter Sam begins to worry about missing Henry's train. As the refreshment lady approaches the platform, Peter Sam suddenly starts. He claims that he had heard the whistle from the guard, who, on the other hand, believes Peter Sam was simply too impatient. The coaches quickly alert Peter Sam that he has left the refreshment lady behind. He stops to allow her on board the train, thinking he will surely be late now. Peter Sam races back to Crovinsgate as fast as he can, fearing that he will miss Henry. Fortunately, to Peter Sam's relief, he arrives at the station and finds that Henry is still there. The refreshment lady angrily demands to know why Peter Sam left her behind. However, upon hearing his apology and explanation, she laughs and explains that Henry was only joking. As a guaranteed connection, he has to wait for their passengers. Peter Sam is furious and determined to give the big green engine a piece of his mind, but he is too late as a chortling Henry has already left the station. Having not watched this episode until later in my life, I find it a damn shame that I never got to see this as a kid, because this really is an entertaining episode. It gives us more insight into Peter Sam's personality and introduces a new human character in the Refreshment Lady. And even though this little thing showed up in the last episode, I wanted to save it for this episode because it really takes centre stage here. And it's the fact that a modified model of OJ from Tugs, known as Lakesider 3, appears in the water as Peter Sam enters the lake station. This was another Tugs model that the Thomas team required after the studio went bankrupt after the airing of the first Tugs series. So as we all know, Big Mickey made cameos countless times at Brendam Docks throughout the series, and various trampers and ocean liners made appearances as well. And this series is the first time we got to see a Star Tugs character modified to look like a different tugboat and take centre stage. And I love that they used OJ's model for this one because a paddle tug just seems to fit really well in this environment. And OJ's model is currently owned by Tugs the Exhibition at Butterley Railway Station, who have lovingly restored him to his glory with his face mask, his hat, and keeping his Lakesider No. 3 paint job. I personally think it's a lovely combination of the two, showing the Tugs side of OJ and the Thomas the Tank Engine side of OJ. So everybody give a round of applause for Tugs the Exhibition for keeping the legacy of this character and the show alive. On a side note, Peter Sam's brief song, I'm Peter Sam, I'm running this line, while puffing down his line, is the same melody as the 1840s song Skip to My Lou. This was something I never found out until researching this episode for the review. And Peter Sam's predicament in the episode where he leaves the refreshment lady behind reminds me of Thomas and the Guard and Thomas's train. Where Thomas ends up leaving the guard behind, in this episode Peter Sam leaves the refreshment lady behind. And the Thomas's train part of it is the reasons why Peter Sam started in the first place. Like how Thomas started without his coaches, while thinking that maybe someone forgot to couple him to the train, or perhaps the driver pulled the lever by mistake. There's two sides to the story in Peter Sam's case. Peter Sam thinking that he definitely heard the guard's whistle, and the guard saying that Peter Sam was too impatient to wait for the whistle. And because we didn't hear the guard blowing his whistle in the episode, then we'd all be forgiven to come into the conclusion that Peter Sam was too impatient. And this episode was inspired by an accident that occurred on the Skarloey Railway. However, it was not the engine's fault, but the fault of the guard, who happened to be the Reverend Wilbert Audrey, and the woman left behind was in fact the driver's mother-in-law. Because as we all know, Wilbert Audrey used to volunteer for the Skarloey Railway. So it's very interesting and amusing that he based this story off of something that he did while working at the Skarloey Railway. It's just a fun trivial fact about this episode that always makes me smile. And the lake station is such a gorgeous area to me. Just looking at it, it really reminds me of the seaside towns and villages that I've visited over the years. And the railway aspect of it puts me in mind of Bristol Harbour Railway, since every summer they run the steam engines there for visitors. And Duncan makes another brief cameo in this episode despite not being introduced until Home at Last. This creates a continuity error since he wasn't meant to appear until that episode. But if you wanted to, you could make the argument that it might have been a different engine that was visiting, but because we know it's Duncan's model, it's a continuity error and a goof. The team really did have a habit of showing Duncan before his initial appearance, didn't they? But the funniest goof of the episode, in my opinion, is when Henry is wearing Gordon's sad face at Crovin's Gate. It's just such an odd moment that always makes me chuckle. Just seeing Henry with Gordon's face is just a really funny moment to me. And it reminds me of those moments in the previous series where Thomas and Percy would often wear each other's faces from time to time. It's just a fun little goof that I can't get enough of watching each time I rewatch this episode. Peter, Sam and the Refreshment Lady is definitely an episode that I recommend checking out if you're into funny plots. While there's no chase scenes, runaways or crashes in this episode, it's a fun slice of life episode with a little funny moment that was inspired by one of Wilbert Awdry's own actions. And having rewatched it multiple times in my later years, I find it a real damn shame that I never got to experience this as a child. I'm sure I would have loved this episode to bits when I was a kid, but I'm really glad that I got to see it years later. It's definitely a fun episode that I recommend checking out if you haven't seen it already. It's a fun slice of life episode with a little bit of comedy thrown in.